What if I told you your vote could count, and still not really count, because of how someone drew a line on a map you've never seen? That invisible line has a name: gerrymandering. Before we break this down, hit subscribe, like this video, and share it with someone who always votes but feels like nothing changes. By the end, you'll see why the map might be rigged long before Election Day, and what that means for Black communities in 2026. What gerrymandering actually is. At its core, gerrymandering is the practice of drawing election district boundaries to give one group, usually a political party or racial group, an unfair advantage over others. In a fair system, districts are supposed to group people by geography so that communities can choose representatives who speak for them. With gerrymandering, people in power use the map itself as a tool to lock in their seats, weaken their opponent's voting power, and shape which communities get a voice in government. The word itself is a mashup of Gerry and salamander. It comes from Elbridge Gerry, governor of Massachusetts in 1812, who signed a redistricting plan that created a district shaped so oddly, a cartoonist said it looked like a salamander, and dubbed it a gerrymander. The name stuck. Gerrymandering is not new. What's new is the level of data, software, and precision now used to slice up neighborhoods in ways that are almost impossible to see unless you zoom out. How it works: packing and cracking. Two key tricks drive most gerrymandering. Packing. Cram as many voters of the target group as possible into a few districts. Example: make one district 80-90% black or 80-90% aligned with one party, so their votes waste as huge supermajorities. Result: that group wins big in a few places but loses influence everywhere else. Cracking: split a community into several districts where they're always a minority. Example: take a dense black neighborhood and divide it into 3 districts, each with, say, 25-30% black voters. Result: they rarely elect the representative of their choice in any district, even though they're a large block overall. On the map, this shows up as weirdly shaped districts that snake around cities, jump across rivers, or connect tiny corners of communities that have little in common, except their voting patterns. Question for you: have you ever looked up what your congressional or local district actually looks like? If not, that's homework after this video. A quick origin story, and why it matters now. The original gerrymander in Massachusetts in 1812 was purely partisan. Gerry's Democratic-Republican allies redrew the state Senate map to squeeze Federalists out of power, even though Federalists had more voters statewide. That's important because it reminds us, manipulating district lines has always been about power, not just race. But over time, race and party began to overlap, especially in the U.S. South and parts of urban America, making gerrymandering a powerful tool for shaping black political representation. By the 20th and 21st centuries, gerrymandering is used not just to help one party over another, but also to dilute the voting strength of black and brown communities, sometimes in subtle, technically sophisticated ways. Racial gerrymandering, when maps become a color line. After the Civil Rights Movement, Congress passed the Voting Rights Act of 1965 to stop states from using tricks like literacy tests and at-large elections to suppress black voters. Over time, courts recognized that racial gerrymandering, drawing districts primarily to weaken or segregate voters by race, could also violate the Constitution and the Voting Rights Act. For example, in Shaw versus Reno, 1993, white voters in North Carolina challenged a congressional map that included a long, extremely narrow district designed mainly to gather black voters along a winding route. The Supreme Court said that if race is the predominant factor in drawing lines, and the district is bizarrely shaped with little justification, that can be an unconstitutional racial gerrymander. Here's where it gets complicated for black communities. Sometimes maps are drawn to pack black voters into a few majority black districts far above what's needed to elect black candidates, leaving neighboring districts with fewer black voters than they could fairly have. Officials then claim they're protecting black representation while actually limiting the number of districts where black voters can influence outcomes. In current cases like Allen versus Milligan from Alabama and local fights like McClure versus Jefferson County Commission, Alabama, black voters argue that maps either fail to create enough opportunity districts or pack black communities into a small number of seats in violation of Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. These cases show that the battle over fair maps is very much alive in 2026. Partisan gerrymandering, when courts step back. Now add another twist, partisan gerrymandering, rigging maps for political parties rather than explicitly by race. In Rucho versus Common Cause 2019, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that claims of partisan gerrymandering present political questions beyond the reach of federal courts. Translation: federal courts are not going to police maps that are unfair purely because of party bias, even if they give one party a strong, durable advantage. Why does that matter for black voters and black history? Because in many regions, especially the South, race and party overlap. Black voters overwhelmingly support one party, while white voters lean the other way. When courts say, "We won't touch partisan gerrymandering," they also make it harder to challenge maps that hurt black voters under the banner of just politics. So we have this tension. Racial gerrymandering can still be challenged under the Constitution and the Voting Rights Act. But partisan gerrymandering, which can have very similar effects, is effectively outside the reach of federal courts. States, independent commissions, and voters themselves have to fight it through their own processes. Why gerrymandering hits black communities so hard. Gerrymandering is not just an abstract issue for political science nerds. It shapes real life in black neighborhoods. Lines on a map can influence who writes the laws on policing, schools, housing, healthcare, and environmental regulation, which neighborhoods get resources and which get ignored, whether a candidate who understands your community's history and needs can realistically win. When black neighborhoods are packed into a few heavily black districts, they may elect one or two strong black representatives, but lose influence over multiple surrounding districts that could have been competitive. When they're cracked across many districts, they might never reach the numbers needed to elect their preferred candidates, even if, collectively, they represent a large share of the population. Either way, the community can end up underrepresented in legislatures, city councils, and Congress, even if voter turnout is high. That's why so many civil rights and voting rights cases today are not just about access to the ballot, but about the maps themselves. What this means in 2026. In 2026, gerrymandering sits at the intersection of black history because it's a modern version of older tactics used to control black political power. Technology, because modern map drawing uses detailed data and software to fine-tune districts at the block level. Democracy, because maps drawn today can lock in power for a decade, through 2030 and beyond. Recent cases show both danger and possibility. Some courts and state constitutions have been used to strike down extreme maps and protect communities of color. Other decisions have pulled back federal protections, placing more responsibility on states and voters to fight for fair maps. Question for you. When you see low turnout or people saying voting doesn't matter, how often do you think about the possibility that the map has already weakened their voice before they step into the booth? What you can do about it? You can't personally redraw the map, at least not alone, but you're not powerless. Here are a few ways people are pushing back. Learning the map. Look up your congressional, state, and local districts. Ask, do these lines make sense, or do they look like they were drawn for someone's political benefit? Supporting independent commissions and reforms. Some states and cities use independent redistricting commissions or adopt clear criteria to limit partisan bias. Reforms often come from voter initiatives, pressure on state legislatures, or lawsuits under state constitutions. Backing voting rights and fair maps cases. Organizations bring lawsuits like Allen v. Milligan and McClure v. Jefferson County to protect black voters' representation. Public attention and support can influence how aggressively these fights are pursued. Telling the stories. Gerrymandering is technical, which makes it easy to hide. Turning it into stories about real neighborhoods, families, and issues helps more people care. That's where creators, educators, and everyday citizens come in. If this video made you think differently about maps, elections, and why some communities feel permanently underrepresented, do 3 things right now. Comment with your state or country and whether you've ever seen how your district is drawn. Share this video with someone who's frustrated with politics but hasn't considered how gerrymandering might be part of the problem. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss future deep dives into the structures, old and new, that shape black political power and everyday life in 2026. Because democracy isn't just about who shows up to vote, it's also about who drew the lines before you ever walked in.